Well, hello again, and welcome to the second part of my going back in time, back to the future, pretty much 50 years. For those of you that saw the video 2 weeks ago, you'll already know that my intention was to take out my old faithful Yashica Minister 3 35mm film camera. It's the first proper, if you like, 35mm camera that I ever owned, and this is the original one, which I've kept all these years. So I thought, what the heck, let's put a roll of film through it and see exactly what happens. I decided, rightly or wrongly, to actually invest in a roll of expired Fujicolor 400 ISO film. It expired in 2007. And then to get it processed, I decided to use one of my local high street laboratories here in the UK. They go under the name of Max Spielmann, or just Max for short. By no means professional outlet, but the guy in my local store, very friendly, and he did the job for me. I'll go into detail and explain the pros and cons of what happened in a moment, but first and foremost, as promised, I'm going to show you all 24 images straight out of camera. These are the scans which were provided to me. Basically, take your film in, they'll develop the negatives and then scan them, and they emailed them to me. So these 24 shots are in the same order in which they were taken, both good and bad. So without any further ado, let's get those out of the way. Well, there you are. Successful in as much as it was a 24 exposure 35mm film and all 24 came out. The good news is that the camera performed faultlessly. There are some underexposed images, which is basically user error combined with the fact that it was very much outdated film. There are a lot of issues, obviously, and I'm going to talk you through the problems with each and every one, and then I'll also show you my edited version of each image. Okay, so I've altered the order of these first few images because I wanted to emphasize the banding which is visible on every negative. It is more obvious on some shots than in others, so I've picked this one out and highlighted some of the bands in these red rectangles, and you can see that there is a yellow-green line running vertically. Now that's nothing to do with the transport mechanism in the camera. If it was, it would be running horizontally instead of vertically. In my opinion, this is where the film has suffered by being stored badly, probably got warm at some stage, and in various sections of each piece of the film it has been discoloured. Now, as far as I can tell, it was affecting the red layer more than any other, and I suppose I could have spent a lot longer in getting rid of that in post, but to be honest with you, the results weren't really worth spending a lot of time on. So all I did was to increase the black point, which basically builds up the density in the image rather than increasing the contrast overall. That wasn't required. But you can see that it does really emphasize the bands in this particular shot. So next on the list was simply to try and convert it. I converted it to monochrome and added some grain, which I probably needn't have bothered to do because this is extremely grainy anyway. And this is pretty much all of the negative. And in this next shot, which I did crop slightly, again, increased black point, which I did for every one of these images, by the way, just so that you're aware of that. There we are, I've cropped in slightly tighter, and this time when I've gone to a monochrome version, I think it's a lot more successful. So I think out of all the images that I took, this is probably one of my favourites, to be perfectly honest with you. This was the very first shot that I took, and here I've just straightened it, increased black point again, and gotten rid of some of the horrible dust marks which were evident on practically every single shot. This particular image was definitely underexposed by probably 2 stops, so I've had to increase the exposure and black point with this one. The Metropolitan Cathedral, I've cropped in quite a lot tighter here. Tried to clean up as best I can the sky, and this is one of those images where the banding isn't as evident. And this was the detail shot of one of the glass panels, so I've cropped in really quite tight here just to exclude all the unwanted background information. Heavily underexposed negative, and all I could do here was to bring up the black point and contrast. Basically, the information in the foreground completely lost, more or less. And, well, you can see the amount of grain in there. It's horrible. But there you go. We give it a try. And on this occasion, it was a failure. Anfield Stadium, quite a lot of building work going on there around the perimeter. But all this needed really was, again, a black point increase and cropping and cleaning. And that's one of the rare images which really didn't require much cleaning at all. When I worked in the photo finishing industry, we used to employ a woman full-time to do nothing else but retouch enlargements. It was 9 times out of 10 cheaper to have her working 8 hours a day doing spotting work rather than sending the print back and having it reprinted. This is Stanley Park, a shot that I quite like, I'll be honest with you. I wanted to try different apertures to see what the bokeh was like from the Yashinon lens. So this was taken at f2.8, and I'm very happy with that. All I needed to do there was to straighten it up, clean it up, and increase the black point. Same venue, just a few meters away from that previous shot. This was one of those exposures where really the camera did its best with regard to the exposure, but I decided really to get rid of any residual detail in the archwork and concentrate more on the view beyond, if you like. Colour balance isn't quite right with this one. Stanley Park down by the lake, this lone angler turned up, and I was quite happy to take that, not exactly grab shot, but off the cuff kind of image of him. I quite like his position within the frame, and quite a bit of retouching was required there. If you want to compare the before and after shots, I'm sorry, but you'll have to shuttle backwards and forwards through the video. It might not be worth your effort. Not as successful, because I think in this particular shot the angler is lost against the background. And looking back to Anfield Stadium from Stanley Park, I just wanted to get an overall impression of how large the stadium is now with the additional seating that they've put in over the past few years. This is Anfield Cemetery, I beg your pardon. Again, I was curious to see what the bokeh would be like on this old camera of mine, and it does look rather busy in this particular example. I think it's dependent on the distance of the out of focus areas from the main subject. The waterfront, obviously, everybody knows what the waterfront looks like these days in Liverpool, and I'm pretty happy with that as a monochrome image. In colour, I was struggling here with a lot of the marks and streaks. You can see I haven't even bothered to retouch the spots in the foreground and in the sky. It was just a mess. Another one where I did two very similar shots at different apertures. This is 2.8, focusing on the railings in the foreground, and then I closed it down to, I think it was f11 for this one, which I think is the more successful of the two images, even though I prefer the shallower depth of field in the first one. And then to finish off with, I spotted these two ladies having a chat down by the Tate Modern Art Gallery in Liverpool. And this is a much tighter crop than the original photograph that you've seen earlier on, but I quite like the way that the girl is just hanging around hoping to get some food off this lady. And a square crop on one of the final images of the pump house down at the Albert Dock, with the old London bus sort of in the mid-distance there. The banding, I'm afraid, is just something that I wasn't able to quickly get rid of in post. As I say, if I'd spent a lot more time on it, then I suspect I could have done a better job. And finally, just a shot looking down on top of one of the old lock gates which lead into the Albert Dock itself. So there we are. I think it has to be put down as a success, a qualified success. Successful because the good old Yashica Minister performed faultlessly. The underexposed images, of which there were a few, is probably down to user error. The problem with a selenium cell meter like this is, depending on where you point it, it's going to give you wildly differing results. So some of it was down to guesstimation, I guess, and I got it wrong on a couple of occasions. But overall, the camera performed faultlessly. There are no light leaks, so if I did ever put a film through it again in the future, I'll come on to that in a minute, I know that the camera itself is working fine. However, the mistake was really to buy a roll of film which was dated 2007 and obviously hadn't been stored very well. You'll have seen by now the marks on some of the negatives, more obvious in some than others. I think if I was going to do the same exercise again with expired film, I would restrict it to black and white, not colour. The risks with colour film are greater than with black and white film. The processing, deliberately I chose to use a high street outlet. If I had paid more and been using a fresh roll of film, then it would have been, I think, much better for me to send it off to a mail order specialist company who takes greater care. A lot of the issues, I think, with my film was dust in the scanning apparatus that Max Spielman use. As you've already seen, some of the negatives were covered in spots. And there was a couple of damaged negatives as well. But overall, I am delighted with the outcome, particularly with regard to the camera itself. You know, a nearly 60-year-old camera, still performing really faultlessly, to be honest with you. So I think from an overall perspective, a successful exercise. Will I be doing it again in the near future? Probably not, in all honesty. The advantages that you get from shooting film, in as much as it slows you down, it makes you concentrate more on each and every exposure. Those, to my way of thinking now, are outweighed by the increased cost. I just can't really justify £25 minimum spend on 24 exposures. Black and white, process it myself and then scan it again myself, then that's a possibility, but I think it's too involved for me, in all honesty. But I hope you enjoyed the experiment and even some of the photographs. They're nothing to write home about. Are there any keepers? The answer is probably 100% no. But I enjoyed it. And, you know, the whole point of this channel is to get enjoyment out of your photography. And I hope you guys out there watching this did get a little bit of enjoyment out of this particular video and exercise. So until the next time, make sure you carry on enjoying your photography, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye for now.